Welcome everyone to the Moisky News for May the 20th, 2020. Today I'd like to talk about the government's recent release of the 13 documents that set out the UK government's approach to Brexit negotiations. I say 13 documents because they include an outline of a free trade agreement, which drew inspiration from Canada, South Korea and Japan's agreements with the EU, along with proposals for separate agreements on law enforcement, fisheries, aviation, energy and civil nuclear cooperation. Personally, I prefer that individual topics be agreed upon as separate entities rather than how the EU would rather, how about we just use the previous framework when you were members and a blanket apply it here. This is supported by Michel Barnier nixing all of this by saying that the EU was not prepared to copy and paste aspects of existing agreements with other countries, which I can understand, even though those deals are intriguing. Notice we left Norway out of this. I wonder why. But he also said that he is unwilling to do a sector-by-sector deal, which I also think is stupid, because that is the best way to ensure both sides get the best deal. Sounds to me like someone isn't willing to play, well, I'd say ball, because it's better than fairly, because fair is a very subjective term. I'm starting to notice the lack of flexibility Michael Gove, the snack, referenced last week. Imagine my shock. Michael Gove yesterday went into Parliament to answer an urgent question on last week's discussions. That was by Emily Thornberry. This brought up the subject of level playing field rules. What are level playing field rules, you ask? Well, they are basically the very thing that make it very clear that everyone involved lacks the lobes for business. Because these are a set of rules that prevent businesses and standards. They prevent businesses in one country undercutting their rivals and gaining a competitive edge, because that hasn't been going on for centuries. And it's not like people do it all the time anyway. UK's chief negotiator David Frost has written a letter to the EU about this, saying that the UK's proposals were similar agreements that the EU has with other countries, and that it is perplexing the EU is insisting on additional unbalanced and unprecedented provisions in a range of areas as a precondition for an agreement between us. With him saying, overall we find it hard to see what makes the UK uniquely among your trading partners so unworthy of being offered the kind of well-precedented arrangements commonplace in modern FTAs. Your text contains novel and unbalanced proposals which would bind this country to EU laws or standards. It does not have to be like this. I remain convinced that it would be very straightforward for us to agree a modern and high-quality FTA and other separate agreements like those you have agreed with other close partners around the world, and that we could do so quickly. I think the reason the EU doesn't want to do that is because they don't want to be seen giving any ground to someone that leaves, setting the standard to keep everyone else in line should they decide to leave as well. So possibly Italy if the EU does nothing about China when this is all done. Maybe Hungary if the EU continue to sanction them for not taking migrants in. When Gove was in Parliament, he told MPs the EU essentially wants us to obey the rules of their club even though we are no longer members, and they want the same access to our fishing grounds as they currently have while restricting our access to their markets. It remains difficult to reach a mutually beneficial agreement while the EU maintains such an ideological approach, with him believing that flexibility from the bloc could then allow for an agreement to be reached before the deadline. Understandably, because the SNP are those ardent former Remoaners now rejoiners, SNP member Pete Wishart accused the government of willfully piling on a second hammer blow to an economy already shattered by COVID in its obsessive pursuit of its hard Brexit agenda, and accusing the government of doing nothing but playing political games with the future of millions of people by pursuing this anti-EU agenda at all costs. I'm starting to understand why the SNP in UK Parliament don't actually play politics at the round table, but instead congregate where the rest of the peanut gallery assemble. The article I've cited a lot of this from comes from the BBC, and the one telltale thing I noticed when it came to the analysts was they weren't really interested in delving into the fact that Gove presented, or that the chief negotiator presented, instead preferring to go down the scaremonger route like the unbiased bitches that they are. Quite a tragic state of things, but unsurprising since they've been doing this for years. Many are now clamouring for WTO. I personally would rather a deal if it could be done, but I want it to be on sector by sector, because that way it is fair. Instead of just saying, yes, but we already have these rules, why don't you just obey our rules, and if we change them, you obey our rules. No, how about we agree on things that need to be agreed upon individually? We means assess it. How about that? And remember this, EU, if we don't agree a deal and you try and fish in our waters, we go to war. I'm kidding. We're just going to moan a lot. You're going to hear it. It's going to be quite loud. We may even then moan more because we can hear the moaning. And it's not even good moaning. It's boring British moaning, like me. Boring British moaning. With this and all other things I cover on this channel, I'd love to know what you think. Please do let me know in the comments down below.